way to respond to the question that we heard this morning: what can international organizations or government can do in order to co-regulate this new field of private governance? Before jumping into substance, I want to make sure that you leave this room knowing what are the main messages and outputs of our report, and then Santiago can cut me when I'm done with my minutes. In our theoretical framework, we strongly confirm the fact that VSS can actually be a catalyst for sustainable development, both directly in changing the way production and performance of services is done, and indirectly through trade as a tool for market access. However, and that's a big however, the effectiveness is not unconditional. The effectiveness of VSS as a tool to reach sustainable development is not unconditional. It depends. It depends on many factors, and I think the value added of this report is to clearly identify some of these factors, which can then, lead the debate and put some clarity in it. We finally provide in the report a sort of a taxonomy of the policy tools that governments and international organizations can refer to if they want to intervene in this sphere of private governance, and they can do that. And finally, one very important message, at least for me, that I come from the research the research world, is that more transparency, data, and analysis is needed to answer the important questions that are raised by this debate. So for sure, and let me say it from the very outset of my presentation, something that can be done is to do more in terms of what the UNFSS is already doing analysis, collecting data, and the ITC is doing a great job in that, and we will see some results of analysis performed with ITC data, and more transparency. And again, transparency is something that governments and international organizations can ask to the world of VSS and VSS systems. So, the definition of VSS systems. We have seen that VSS are documents, but VSS systems, the way we think about them in this report, are the collective of organizations which are responsible for the activity involved in the implementation of the actual document, including the setting of the standard, capacity building, assurance, labeling, and monitoring and evaluation. This definition is taken from the ICO, which is a sort of meta standard that sets standards for standards. Now, very quickly on the conceptual framework that we put forward in this report. We know what VSS are, we know what VSS systems are, and now we can ask what is the role of VSS and VSS systems for sustainable development. So you have this VSS quadrilateral on the left, and then SD on the right, and a big arrow on the top, which is what we call the direct effect. VSS are designed to shape economic activity. And in modifying economic activity toward a more sustainable direction, they're actually doing something for the achievement of sustainable development. They're making economic activity more prone to meet sustainable development goals. But then there's a second effect, which is more indirect. VSS can be a tool to increase market access, can be a tool for producers to trade more, to sell more their products. And we know that trade can have a potentially positive impact on economic growth, and we know that economic growth is an important pillar of sustainable development. So in this report, we're not talking about the connection between trade and economic growth, and between economic growth and sustainable development, but we will focus on the role of VSS in promoting trade, in increasing or decreasing market access. And again, just as a graphical representation of the question that we're tackling, what's the effect of VSS on trade? And the way we think about it, we use two sort of lenses. The first one is by asking whether and how VSS can increase or reduce discrimination vis-a-vis certain types of agents in the supply chain, certain type of producers. And by asking the question of whether and how VSS increase or reduce trade costs for certain type of agents in the production chain. And the way we answer these questions is it depends. We already listened to a very similar answer before, and I think this is really important. To put clarity in this debate, we need to be honest with ourselves and say, it depends. It really depends. And again, the value added of this report is identifying 3 sets of important factors that can make the answer going in a direction rather than the other. Let me mention them to you. The first set on the top is, we call it VSS institutional design. How these systems, how these organizations are designed, if they are transparent or not, if they impose a certification cost on producers or not. All these factors shape the way VSS impact on trade. Then we have a second important set of factors, which is the Vss Landscape. How many systems are there? How clear is for producer which is the right system for them to comply with? The Vss Landscape is again an important factor that determines, that shapes the effect of VSS on trade. And finally, we have the product and country environment. That includes competition policy, the degree of competition, in a sector, in a country, and of course calls for the action and the reflection of competition policy. These 3 sets of factors will determine whether VSS are actually a tool to increase market access or a barrier for market access. And you can read more details in the report how we think about this. So let me briefly give you some of the empirical results that we present in the report, both on the direct effect of VSS on sustainable development and on the indirect effect of VSS on sustainable development. Let me start with the direct effect. So how do we think about the sustainable development? It's, we have heard before that we always talk about sustainability, but at the end of the day, we don't really know what it is about. So we do a very simple exercise, which is we rely on the Sustainable Development Goals, which are concrete targets that we can actually measure with respect to what the standards are asking to producers. So we are comparing here our methodologies to benchmark 10 Sustainable Development Goals with the requirements that are written in the standards and that are aggregated and collected by the ITC in the standards methodologies. And we actually identified 294 requirements asked by the standards that speak directly at least to one of these Sustainable Development Goals, which are dimensions of sustainability. And when we actually count how many requirements speak to each of these 10 goals, we find that there are some goals which are very prominent in the requirements of VSS, and that there are other goals which are much less represented by the requirements. And we see on the top, SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth, we have 102 requirements out of the 290-something that are speaking directly to these SDG, to this dimension of sustainability. So I think this is an interesting first descriptive exercise to see how the VSS landscape can actually speak directly to sustainable development. If we have a lot of requirements that are calling for a change in the way things are done, products are produced and services are performed, that call for a higher respect of SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth, then we can really think about VSS as a potential tool to directly impact on this dimension of sustainability. Now, let me tell you quickly something about the indirect effect of VSS, that is the effect of VSS on trade. The methodology here is to focus only on some of the key factors that we have seen in the diagram before, and what I will talk to you today is about the institutional features of the design of VSS, whether they support producers and who has to pay the costs given the institutional design of VSS. You can find more of this analysis in the report. So when we look carefully at the institutional design of VSS systems, we actually find that, and again, these data come from the ITC standards map, we find that the most recurrent strategy of cost allocation is to actually leave producers alone, bearing the cost of implementation. Now, if you go back to the chart that we saw before, this is likely to generate an environment where VSS can actually represent an additional trade cost for producers if the cost of implementation, and the same holds true for the cost of certifications, have to be have to be sustained by producers alone. In some other cases, producers are helped by other supply chain players, but again, in implementation and certification costs, what we find with the data that is available is that producers are substantially left alone. Again, another dimension of the institutional design of the Ess Systems that we look at is how they provide support to producers. And we see that a lot of them provide support through documents, some of them through technical assistance to meet the requirements, fewer of them through technical assistance to go beyond the requirements, which in some cases going beyond the requirements would mean, making the VSS working to enhance productivity, something that we have discussed before, and very, very little and very few systems provide support to producers through financial assistance. Again, all these data are discussed in greater details in the report. Let me just conclude. So we know that in this debate there are numerous points of views based on incomplete information. So we really need more analysis, more data, and more transparency on VSS systems. We have provided some first preliminary descriptive evidence based on a conceptual framework that has been developed for this report, and we have conducted this large and empirical assessment based on the ITC database. And again, I didn't have time today, but I really want to refer to the report as an interesting and useful tool in the sense that it provides this taxonomy of all the policy actions that can be undertaken to contribute to making VSS working for sustainable development. But again, one key implication of our analysis is that more is needed in terms of data and further analysis in order to give very precise policy implication. But the tools are there, are in the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matteo, for the presentation, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. As you can see, there's a lot of information in the report. There's two issues that are also covered in the report, which are fundamental. One is it looks at the multiplicity of VSS in terms of certification scheme. Multiplicity means, in a way, fragmentation, having various certification schemes that, to a certain extent, address the same issues, and what are the implications for developing countries. In this area, it's a first attempt. It's again based on the database available. And the second one, which I think it's a pity that you missed the slide, with all the policy options there for the governments, in a way, for policy interventions, that options going from soft, like information, transparency, and things like that, to the hard ways of, regulations and things like that, which are sort of hard. So there is a sort of a table there where it can gives you, and because I'm addressing to some government officials, that you can take a look into deeper options that we have analyzed. However, I can say from this report, we try to make it in a way, from a theoretical perspective, what it's a practical issue. In a way, we've seen from our previous presentation that as consumers, producers who are faced with this, they're faced with this on a practical level. But there needs to be policy discussions on the implications for this. The second part of the report addresses a very fundamental area of the way we in UNFSS, in UNCTAD, in FAO, in ITC, UN Environment, UNIDO, see, which is the multi-stakeholders approach, the national platforms. And there we look at things that are very demand-driven, and this is fundamental. I just, underline the way demand-driven, because these national platforms that we've been supporting, we've been working, are national platforms that have been brought to the attention of the UN from these national actors, where they want to reflect upon that. And you can see in this slide a bit of the activities that we tend to support, and some of those national platforms that we are presently supporting in India, in China, and Brazil. The key is, I think, we facilitate dialogue. We try to work on seeing how the international standards affect the domestic conditions. There's the networking effect among developing countries in this area. Linking policy to research. But we put in bold, getting governments involved in the discussions. And I think this is one of the key you saw in the panel before or wherever we present, getting governments involved. We do not prescribe how they should get in what way they should get involved, but we say let them get involved, at least in the discussions. And there are a lot of outputs that we have done with these national platforms, but it's not for me to explain that, it's for them to explain. So now I will let my colleague and friend Manish Pande to give his presentation on India.
Outset, let me thank UNFSS, particularly UNCTAD, to invite India and Quality Council of India, which is my organization, to talk about what we are doing as a national platform. My presentation is a mix of very less theoretical, but more about the activities that we do. And so I start with this slide, which is basically what we understand the VSS landscape as. And as you see that we talk about standards, voluntary standards for us. Under the voluntary standards, we distinguish private standards and private voluntary standards. And as a part of the government, the focus is more on to see that, how the private sustainability standards are fitting our landscape or our trade issues. Now, we all understand what are technical regulations in terms of mandatory requirements, but how we understand private standard is to think that, they are designed and owned by non-governmental entities. And when you talk, it is about either for profit or they are what we call as a coalition of private partners that come together to make something which they want to tell a particular process or a product to be uniquely signifying a task. It could be compliance with agricultural practices, could be social welfare and things like that. So as us, we focus on the private sustainability standards more, and I would now talk about the compliance ecosystem in our country in India. So we all understand that when you talk about technical regulations, it is basically addressing issues on health safety, national security, and tackling unfair trade practices. So we understand that the government comes with a regulation, a regulatory system. Now these regulators go to the manufacturers, go to supply chain and service providers, seek compliance, and if it is compliant, then they give licenses. The other part of the story is that there is an element of voluntariness, and when we talk about competitiveness, global trade, and in this case is what our platform does. We engage the voluntary standards or specifically the private standards, and in this you understand that there is a scheme owner for each of these voluntary schemes. There is a mechanism of accreditation attached to it to give it a global acceptance, and then we have these confirmatory assessment bodies or the certification bodies for the group. Now these certification bodies would send their assessors or auditors to the to again the manufacturer, supply chain, and service providers, and at the end of the day, they give them certificate if they are compliant, and the consumer is benefited in both ways. Now, a positive development or a movement which is forward in our country is that the governments are increasingly seeing the voluntary standards. If a producer or a company has a voluntary certificate, that they take cognizance and relax some of the regulatory requirements. So this is where we see that there is a synergy between the voluntary standards and the regulations happening. Now UNFSS, so when we talk about these synergies and things like that, there was a mechanism that we are looking forward to institutionalize it. And then came the UNFSS thing, and we interacted with Santiago and Matteo at that point of time. And then we established the first national platform under the aegis of UNFSS. And so what is this platform of ours? Basically, if you see that it is basically demand-driven, as the UNFSS is. It is diverse, solution-oriented, because we see that there are issues in terms, because India happens also to be a producer country. So there could be issues coming out of VSS or PSS which needs to be tackled. We are collaborative, deliberative, and we try to harmonize things so that the producer has less difficulties in adopting and getting its certification. Now, so the structure that we have in our national platform is, we call it as the INPPSS, which has principal organs as a multi-stakeholder assembly. We have a steering concept which drives our agenda. There are sectoral committees which we have identified and have those committees to debate, discuss, and get some resolutions if there are issues. And we have a secretariat which, of course, does all this. Now the journey is a bit long, but I'll keep it short. So we had this standards conclave, which is done by the Ministry of Commerce. There, the Quality Council, which is my organization, identified as the nodal for doing taking up the platform. We had launched this PSS platform in March 16. We have been sort of speaking about our experiences. We had the first multi-stakeholder assembly in December 16. Then we were participating in the platforms. We launched the India story, was funded by UNCTAD. We were also present during the VSS launch of Mexico. And we then have a charter where we clearly mention about what we are going to do and how we are going to do. And we then have started to talk to the government themselves to put some of the VSS and not PSS to consider them for public procurement. We have also a study which has been okayed by the government to address the export promotion concerns that we have in our country. There are 42 in various commodities. And of course, then we did, we were identified by the UNFSS to launch the third flagship report, and we did this international convention on 17th and 18th of September a few weeks back. Now this is what is our focus area. We talked about a program called Z, which is zero defect, focused on the SMEs. We have these producers. We have our good agriculture practices, which is the India, the SAR gap, and trying to connect it with the global gap. We identify product categories. We are involved in research. We identify best practices. We also do one thing which we understand the scheme standards, see what are the best international practices, do a stakeholder consultation, do a review of it, and are planning to do some kind of endorsement and certification, whether those standards are indeed sustainability standards or just otherwise. Once we do that, we do the certification or assist in certification, and then that would assist the trade. So these are mostly that we focus on and try to work on that. Now, this is something that we do as a platform. We are helping the SARC in some good agricultural practices. We have awarded a declaration between the national platforms. We participate in the APFS3. We have one example where where a global standard has been done a national interpretation, and of course we have done this study which talks about 3 sectors and the impact of PSS on them. So this is what we do. Now a few slides about the international convention that was held on the 17th and 18th of September. It was a joint initiative of the Government of India, QCI, and the UN. We had 15 agenda items, 72 speakers, 7 national initiatives were there, and we had approached about 40 countries. These are our partners. So we had everyone as stakeholders with us in this. These many countries were approached, and we secured participation. There were various sessions which included a visit from the DSG. We had, on international trade and sustainable development. We had expert panel on social accountability. That we launched best practices book on sustainable trade and value chains. We had, of course, then declaration of cooperation among national platforms. So this is the spread of the convention that we did. We had people talking about what they felt about the convention and what they understand sustainability, which includes, of course, DSG, UNCTAD, Commerce Minister of India. We had our textile committee secretary. So they had given their own things. So the key recommendations that came out of that was to develop a global benchmarking mechanisms for the VSS scheme, a national strategy for VSS, undertake policy revision for sustainable public procurement, consumption-based standards have to be in focus. We want to have a rigorous data with managerial decision-making tools to make business deliver public goods. Improvement-based standards, data engagement among national platforms, which we think is to support the objective of UNFSS, and of course capacity building programs within the country to drive the PSS. So these are the speakers which we have. He is my chairman and my secretary general. We had in middle is Dr. Harsha Singh, who is the president of our steering committee with the members of UNCTAD. This is the new delegation that we had. This was a panel on government public procurement. We had about 500 delegates attending for 2 days. We had the launch, which was the formal launch of the third flagship report. We had this panel of developmental organizations. We had also the national initiatives speaking and giving their perspectives. This was the declaration signed amongst Mexico, India, and Brazil under the aegis of the UNFSS. This is a guidebook on best practices which the various organizations gave. This was a cultural evening, and this is the way forward, which is my last slide, which talks about operationalizing the declaration that we have done amongst the three national platforms to start with. There are some recommendations of the ISTS which we will follow it up. We have an Indian National Strategy for Standardization, and the platform needs to further look and operationalize that, whatever comes to us as our responsibility. We have public policy advocacy for corporations to adopt responsible sourcing. And of course, at the end, we want to simplify SDG localizations to the global value chains. So this is what we do. This is the team which handles the Indian Basis platform in India. And they all say thank you to UNFSS. Thanks.
Thank you, Manish, for your presentation. For us, it was really an honor to have the Minister of Commerce and Industry of India launching the third flagship. And as you can see, we have a lot of discussions in Geneva, but things are happening also in the South. We have this kind of interest that's happening. We just had an event where we had over 500 participants from the private sector, from civil society, from the governments. The year before, we had likewise in China, we had a similar crowd and interest. So we were working with what our partners are telling us. They're delivering in terms of research, they're delivering in terms of policy dialogue. And we were very honored because at the end of this 2 days discussions, there was a declaration of understanding from three national platforms on VSS, which was basically Mexico, India, and Brazil, where there was an intention of more collaboration, South-South collaboration among them, but South-South collaboration with the support of the UN. And this is something that it makes us move forward with them in the demand driven. Now I would like to invite my colleague and friend Rogerio Correa to tell us a bit of the Brazilian experience and his inputs in terms of what was done also with regards to the flagship. Thank you, Rogerio.
Good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank UNCTAD and UNFSS to invite me to share the Brazilian experience of our national platform. Brazil is very much committed with the Agenda 2030 in SDGs. The NTM issue is also a very important trade challenge to Brazil with its company made SMEs. The Brazilian National Platform is in some instances an answer to both challenges. This morning, it's my intention to present the national platform, my organization, INMETRO, the Brazilian Parity Infrastructure System, the national platform key objectives, and its main results after 1 year of work. I'd like also to thank Matteo and Manish to spare me of the concepts presentation of VSS and give me the chance of presenting all the practicalities of our national platform. So, this is some landmarks of Brazil. I have also presented them in my Tuesday presentation. So Brazil is a federative republic with 27 states, located in South America. Our capital is Brasilia, extension is 80.5 square kilometers, population 207 million inhabitants. Our GDP is about $1.8 trillion. I will speak Portuguese, not Russian. And our currency is Brazilian real. So this is a photograph of the campus of my organization, INMETRO. INMETRO is the Brazilian National Institute of Quality and Technology. The vision of INMETRO is to provide confidence to Brazilian society concerning measurements in products, promoting harmonization, consumption relations, innovation and competitiveness through metrology and conformity assessment. So the key issues of the work of INMETRO is metrology and conformity assessment, and it is the issues inside the NTMs and perhaps the VSS issue. So the INMETRO key activities metrology. INMETRO is the Brazilian Metrology Institute, so in charge for performing all the key measurements or the development of the key measurements. In Brazil, INMETRO also acts as a regulatory agency, and among 32 agencies, regulatory agencies in Brazil, federal regulatory agencies. INMETRO is a national accreditation body for laboratories in certification bodies. INMETRO is also the Brazilian WTO activity by point, and the whole INMETRO is the place of the Brazilian National VSS platform. So this is a chart of the Brazilian system of quality infrastructure. It's called INMETRO, Brazilian System Metrology Quality Infrastructure, quality, and in charge of giving the instructions to the Brazilian regulatory agency is a council of ministers. It's called CONMET, Council of Ministers of Metrology Quality Infrastructure. It is formed by 10 ministries, also is our Industry Confederation, our Foreign Trade Confederation, Agriculture Confederation, our body of defense of consumers, and our standardization body called the INTMs. INMETRO is in charge for the Secretariat. INMETRO is the executive body of all this, so it's in charge for providing all the issues related to quality infrastructure and to keep the system running. I underline one of the advisory committees of the Council is the President Committee on Technical Trade, is where the Brazilian National Platform is anchored. So we come to SDGs. These are the 17 SDGs, and the main SDGs involved in VSS. Matteo put a lot of these I'll pass to it. And the national platform objectives. The key objectives of the national platform is to fulfill governance gaps related to VSS policies in Brazil. Indeed, Brazil has policies of implementation of the 2030 agenda that is in charge of the government of Brazilian presidents. But VSS is more related to the activities of INMETRO and the national platform. Coming on to promote the direction of its government and private sector stakeholders, being a multi-sectoral stakeholder environment, so it's very important. It's a very important objective of it, to provide companies and customers awareness on VSS and in order to meet the SDGs, to improve the quality and competitiveness of national products, the product produced in Brazil, to promote national certification through negotiations, promote cooperation with other national platforms in international organizations like the platform of India, Mexico, China, and other countries, and like the UNFSS, and to mitigate the bad impacts of burdensome certification. The issue of establishing Brazilian international platform to recognize, to recognize VSS is a possibility among a list of options to be pursued, but it's not. It means a pragmatic way to Brazilian companies it's more a pragmatic way Brazilian companies take a vote. So the issue, the question of promoting VSS in Brazil is inside the options of the platform, but it's not a key issue. It depends on the product association wants to do it or not. It's a very important one. This is the home page of the Brazilian National Platform. The X is in the page of in the web page of INMETRO. In some results of this 1 year of work, the platform was launched last year in 2017 in May, and after 1 year of work, we have launched events in the city of Brasília, capital, in São Paulo, with 150 stakeholders from public, private sector, and foreign participants. We have established the web page, international page. We established a working group to execute an action plan and a steering committee to propose activities. We have 3 meetings and almost 10 conference calls among these people. We started the activity to the mapping of PSS in Brazil. We have a lot of sharing of experience in these partners abroad, mainly with DIE and GG group of countries and other national platforms. We report our activities in the third UNFSS flagship, highway here. So we have also established a partnership with Fundação Getúlio Vargas, an important think tank in Brazil, to produce studies on VSS. In this work, we selected, with the aid of our page of promotion of sport index, 19 sectors to map VSS. And we motivate government and private sector stakeholders to be aware and work on VSS issues. These other 3 objectives that almost be accomplished is the establishment of training activities, the selection of a seller to be piloted during implementation projects. These implementation projects are projects that will follow during all the chain of the project, following up the implementation of a certificate, a VSS for a company, and we want to map it and report it, so to use it for student case for other companies that want to perform their certification. And we have some planning projects to find some activities in the maintenance of the office of the platform. So it's a very practical issue. Is the budget of the maintenance of the office and our team. We have a coordination, myself, support analysts in the Brazilian Committee of Commercial Trade, it's a part of time recruiting. The supporting team in FGV is coordinated by Professor Bella Torres and 3 researchers. The specific things outside the mapping of our office, but works very tightly with us. The supporting IT team in INMETRO staff. So in an expert in information that is supposed to be hired. The conclusions of managing the platform. So in this year of work, VSS had a huge implication for business, production companies and service providers. They affect mainly SMEs. There is the need to continuously assess their impact. So the chaotic proliferation and fragmentation of VSS are negative for business as well as for communication SDGs to companies and may cause misunderstandings among consumers. The cooperative work among countries can fulfill structural objectives by raising awareness, providing trainings, improving qualitative structure, and standard assessment, and by promoting mutual recognition or measures of certification. Consequently, mitigating the proliferation of schemes. The issue of the proliferation of schemes is indeed a problem to communicate the SDGs in process VSS. It should be very important to national platform in developing countries to reframe the VSS VSS environment. Acknowledge the importance of achieving SDGs, but not creating necessary technical barriers to trade. And what you can understand of reframing VSS environment is that the last conclusion, because should WTO reopen the discussion on VSS in new grounds and become the normative organization of this very important impactful trade issue. Countries, SMEs, smallholders, and consumers would greatly benefit of it. Well, just for ending my presentation, there are some good and successful examples of PSS. They were presented in the panel before. But an important observation is that we cannot put all of them in the same basket. It's a true issue. We have to continually assess them to verify and guarantee they are giving consumers what they promise, and they not creating unnecessary burdens to producers, mainly SMEs and smallholders, and finally, they get PSS be linked, fully linked with the SDGs. So this is a photograph of the launchment of President Biden from last year in Brazil and Sao Paulo, and I thank you very much for receiving me. Oh, and to end, I think the sectors that I mentioned before are in the chart here, that are in the flagship, and I'm sorry for repeating it.
Muito obrigado, Rogerio. Thank you for your presentation. It's clear that we see that, in general, a lot of things are happening in developing countries in this issue. Some of them, as you can see, the relationship, and that's why it's an NTMs week. You have institutions like INMETRO, which is in nature a TBT institution that we've been discussing for those that's been here for the last 2 days, are also looking at the other side of the coin of the VSS in general as an implication. There's also the importance of seeing how this VSS standards are developed and having effects on developing countries across sectors, across countries, and especially SMEs, producers, not only in around the world, but also in big countries like the ones we have just heard presentations of India and Brazil, where there's a huge amount of SMEs producers, which have large implications from the VSS point of view. Lastly, I commend you on the transparency of your budget. The question would be, is it enough, or is it big or small? Just the fact that you have a budget is already a big thing, and I can speak for us as also as a UN institution. Just the fact that we have resources necessary to respond to this demand is fundamental. So thanks for that. I want to open very quickly to discussion. I know there might be some questions, but we have here with us also the other 4 UN agencies which have been involved in the development of the flagship, and I asked them to just give a short comment. We asked them if they should give us a bit of a reflection from their agency perspective, because I know that many of you have not read the report. What should the audience or the constituency of your agencies be looking for in this report? In a nutshell. So we have, from ITC, we have Sandra Cabrera. She's a project officer. She deals with these issues because the ITC hosts Standards Map, which is a very huge database that contains many of this VSS, and maybe she can give us a bit of her insights on this question. Sandra.
Thank you, Santiago. Can you hear me?
Yeah, they can hear you.
Thank you, Santiago, for the invitation to comment on this amazing report. I must say that we're very proud of that our database information that we have been collected since 2009 on the VSS is being used and really getting some these important insights for the community that are very much involved in what is the impact of the VSS and how we implement them and the implications that they have for the developing countries where we are working, right? In the relationship with the developed markets. So I would say that this report is really enlightening us on a concept that sometimes we as technical development agencies, right, implementing our work on the ground, making understand the SMEs, the producers, the smallholders, what this Vss landscape is about, what the implications are, or getting into them, and really linking these topics between trade and sustainable development, and how important this is for them. So I think for ITC, especially because we are in collaboration with all these standard organizations, and we see the technicalities of what is behind of this Vss, but at the same time, we're also on the ground helping these smallholders to understand them and to implement them. We can see that the dialogue between the different multi-stakeholders is important. We as technical agencies, as a UNFSS forum and all the different agencies with their scope of focusing on the different areas of the sustainability standards, but also the dialogue with the governments, the dialogue with the smallholders, the dialogue with the standard organizations, to understand the different perspectives. So when we talk about the impact of the standards on market access, and I would say that yes, the Vss are tool to access sustainable markets, but sometimes the Vss, they will, as in the report is said, they will be promoting more or less this access based on the, as I said, the relationship that there is in the designing mechanism of the standards and the implementation processes of the standards on the ground, and the transparency and the sharing responsibilities that are in the implementation of the Vss along the supply chain. So these kind of dynamics, I think, are important to understand, and I think the report talks about it, and especially as a governmental level, you know, the different tools that could help the governments to design these public policies. Then something that you asked also when we were talking yesterday is that how trade can shape the influence on developing countries' market access and sustainable development goals. Yeah, as I was saying, the linkages between the Vss and the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, and the exercise that it was done in the report and it was presented by Matteo here, I think it brings a good base for us to understand these linkages between the language that Vss have and the governments have, right, in their commitment towards the realization of the SDGs. So this benchmarking exercise, it's a good first step. But then I would recommend that we align this language of the Vss, talking with in relation to the SDGs language, maybe looking at the implementation level, how these standards are implementing these requirements. And that's something that we can do. I invite the agencies maybe for a next report. UI, we can work on it. So then it will be easier for us to assess the real contribution of Vss towards the SDGs. Right? So.
Thanks, Sandra. You mentioned a lot of interesting things, and ITC.
There's a lot to mention.
There's a lot to mention. I'm giving you not too much time, but the fact that we have been working together in many projects with ITC, delivering on these technical workshops, also shows that we're trying to align our ways of seeing the problems as UN institutions. Now, if Taylor Tainton, she's also an officer in the UN Environment here in Geneva, can give us her take on what should the audience be looking. Taylor, just to commend her work, she has been part of our steering committee for about over 2 weeks, and it's her last week because she's moving to another job. So
2 years.
2 years, for 2 years, for 2 years, sorry. For 2 years and her last week, so I wanted to thank her publicly for all her support during these 2 years to this advancing the understanding of Vss. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Santiago. It's really been a pleasure to work with UNFSS and all the UN agencies that are part of UNFSS over the past few years. And it's also a great opportunity for me to be here today, and so thanks for the invitation to comment on the report. From UN Environment's perspective, we also see the report as a huge achievement and really illustrating and mapping where VSS can deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. I think was a really important undertaking. And looking at how VSS can deliver on sustainable development objectives, the dimension that we see as really important and that I would advise the readers and our constituents to look out for is where VSS can really contribute to the environmental dimension of the 2030 agenda and the different environmental dimension of various SDGs. Because we really see, from UN Environment's perspective, as voluntary sustainability standards, we see them really as an opportunity not only to create market access opportunities for producers in developing countries, but really also to deliver environmental benefits on the ground, so upstream in the value chain, and really to promote environmental sustainability and across a variety of spheres. So I mean, when we look at upstream environmental impacts, we can see voluntary sustainability standards being able to contribute to and will address issues like pollution, climate change related impacts, biodiversity loss, water scarcity, and more. And standards can encourage exports of sustainably produced goods, and then also enable consumers to be able to see the environmental impacts of their purchasing choices. So we really see that as a really important aspect of this work and this mapping. So within UN Environment, I'm working on the Environment and Trade Hub, so we're really looking at trade. We also have a team looking at consumer information, and both of our teams look at voluntary sustainability standards from slightly different angles, but in both cases really looking at standards as a tool, so not only, as I said, market access, but also for consumer information and be able to transmit this information to consumers so they're able to make positioned to make better purchasing decisions that are better for the environment. So I think some of the goals that were showed, that Matteo had showed earlier on the screen, relate that where that VSS can contribute most related to Goal 8 on decent work, Goal 12 on sustainable, responsible consumption and production, and Goal 15, life on land, and Goal 13 on climate action. And across those goals, we see a lot of different environmental criteria that VSS can make a huge contribution to when properly designed. So, I mentioned a few of these issues earlier that could be addressed, but from a more opportunistic approach, or from the positive side, we can see that through the creation of green jobs, through proper management of chemicals and waste, sustainable management of natural resources, voluntary sustainability standards can contribute to all of these things and contribute to the goals that I had just mentioned. So in short, we really see this report providing a lot of insight in this area, and we really see that voluntary sustainability standards can provide a win-win, as we often like to say, both for trade and for the economy, and also really for the national environment and to promote environmental sustainability. So I encourage you to take a look at the report online. It's also on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you for all those comments, because Taylor was always coming back and saying us when we were doing the analysis, where's the environmental implications, where's the environmental, coming back every time with the same and hammering on what should we be looking at, and thank you for that. Now, I would like to ask my colleague and friend Ahmad Mukhtar, the representative of FAO here in Geneva, which is also a fundamental partner in the job of this flagship, to provide us from his angle about the flagship and what should be the readers for the year. Thanks.
Thank you, Santiago. First, I thought that VSS is voluntary speaking slot, but see, you have made it mandatory. And most of these standards are duplicating, so my comments would be duplicated as well. But you asked the question that what should readers find in the report? First, please find the report on websites, because unfortunately we could not print. We are very environmentally friendly, but please do have a look at that. Who is this report for? it is not only FAO's constituency. I mean, of course, most of the VSS or the voluntary standards are in agriculture, fisheries, and forestry that we deal with, but it is basically for everyone. And this who and why question is a mixed one, because a lot has been discussed in this room over the past couple of days. But all of us are probably much more tuned to the discussions on standards from different angles. But look at the country delegates, for example, the constituencies in trade and agriculture ministries in most of the countries, they are not that much at ease with the voluntary standards. I mean, standards in general, but particularly voluntary standards. So this is a contribution for them to start with, and it is just one of the contributions that we need to carry on. The next question, that what is included in this one, I think it has been expressed quite comprehensively in introducing the report, so I don't need to be that much duplicative on this one. But probably, I would say that this is one of the very few instances where this role or interaction between the VSS and trade or market access has been discussed in a bit more scientific way, I would say. And that is the key thing in this report. Now, the next question would be that when this should have been done. I mean, it is one of our flagships, but this is already late, I would say, in terms of contribution on this discussion. And we, that means a larger stakeholders gathering, in addition to the UNFSS, needs to enhance our efforts in this one. Now, where now, the last question, where from this point onwards? We as UNFSS would like for sure to continue, but given whatever our mandates about this platform and the budget or the other resource constraints would allow us. But I would encourage everyone, of course, at our individual agency levels. I can tell you that within FAO, since we have almost, let's say, 78% of all of the voluntary standards within the FAO's mandate, we have already started enhancing our work on this one, including hopefully soon launching some Geneva efforts as well on the VSS and trade linkages. But that's certainly not even enough or even something, but of course we would contribute a lot to the UNFSS. But I would encourage everyone to think a bit more in creating the synergies of this debate, because all in all, apart from the technical and the econometric analysis, it is the small holders or the small exporters, let's put it that way, who are probably at the losing end. We always say about win-win that VSS could contribute, but implementation, first the understanding, and second the implementation of VSS may be challenging if we all do not do our part in different angles. So that, thank you, Santiago.
Thank you, Ahmed. You always have very good points and very constructive points. And better late than never, I would say, to answer to your question. Of course, we're always a bit slow in the UN, but we're there in the discussions. Let me turn now to Dominica Dor. She runs the program in UNIDO related also to quality infrastructure, and she has also been very constructive in trying to bring together this agenda to the industrial side of the discussions. Dominica.
Thank you, Santiago. Good morning, everyone. And I wanted to start, first of all, by saying thank you, big thank you to the UNCTAD team for this huge leadership, commitment, and coordination effort, which is quite substantial. And definitely there was a need for such a neutral platform for discussion on those issues and for analysis, for exchange of experiences. So this is very much appreciated. So UNIDO is, of course, a proud member of the United Nations Forum on Sustainability Standards. And we pretty much, I'm the last one, so I will be repeating a lot of points as I get this benefit. But I think the core message of the report is that the voluntary sustainability standards, if done properly and if used properly, can help operationalize SDGs, can help all different stages and all different actors from the value chains to actually improve on their social and environmental outcomes, and are in the end also what the consumer wants. So in the end, we try to look at them at UNIDO as a market opportunity. Of course, it can be also viewed as a challenge, but we prefer to look at it as actually a window or a door to the new market and opening up new market opportunities. So what we pretty much do at UNIDO, we actually work with SMEs. We work from countries and regions and we help them fulfill, we help them to comply and to achieve. Maybe let's first say achieve and then comply, and show that compliance in the internationally recognized way with the market requirements. And those market requirements are, of course, voluntary standards, technical regulations, and voluntary and sustainability standards. So we usually work with the countries on twofold. We work with the quality infrastructure institutions. So to be precise, we work with the labs, with the certification bodies, so they are able to provide services to the private sector, internationally recognized services. And we also work with the SMEs and with the business support institutions to help them achieve those standards and to help them show the compliance in their internationally recognized way, which opens market opportunities. So just to give you a very concrete example, we have this, one of our projects is Safe Plus in Colombia, where we build it's called trade capacity building for the cosmetic value chain. And actually there again, we work with the quality infrastructure institutions to be able to provide those internationally recognized services. And we work with the SMEs and with business support institutions. And it was quite eye-opening, actually, how many voluntary sustainability standards apply to this value chain. And they are actually de facto now a requirement to access such market as, for example, the European market. In terms of voluntary sustainability standards, we also, of course, participate in partnerships like UNFSS. We work with ICL, and we also try to contribute to the information sharing, which example of can be this flagship report. Due to the time limitations, I will be very brief, and I actually have one core message, which I would like to highlight with regards to the flagship report, and that would be the key and the importance of the good governance. And the key importance of the good governance in design and operationalization of the voluntary sustainable standards schemes. And this is key. This is key for trust. This is key for credibility and for the sustainability of the schemes. And lately what we do at the UNIDO, we actually do a lot of work on the good governance in the quality infrastructure, which can be pretty much also used in the sphere of the voluntary sustainability standards. And just to give you an example why this is so important. For example, due to the best international practices, the standard setting function should be clearly separated from the certification function. So for example, one entity cannot set the standard and then cannot certify as per that standard. And this, for example, if you look at some of the voluntary sustainability standards, this is not the case. So I mean, there are many of those good practices which can find their applications here. So if you would be more interested in learning more about the good governance, there are 3 publications actually currently on the UNIDO website on the guiding principles, a practical guide and a technical guide to quality policy formulation. And that would be my key point. And thank you very much, and I look forward to the 4th.
Yeah, we hear that very often. Thanks, America. I would like to open the floor, although it's very late. It's my fault. I'm responsible. We're late, but I would like to open the floor for questions, in particular to my colleagues and friends here, and we can take it from there. Please. If you can also identify yourself.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
This is Fernández. I'm attending from Turkey, Ministry of Trade of Turkey. And when I go to a supermarket in Turkey or a store in Turkey, for example, for buying a biscuit or a cookie, on the package I see many stamps, seeing some certifications. And to be honest, I don't understand what they mean. If I want to understand, I must Google it. And mostly I don't do that actually. And it was not like this 10 years ago. There was no certification on the packages, or maybe some products had one certification, and it was okay, I think. I'm not against certification. I believe that most of them are made for the sake of human beings. But I think some of them, and that are not really little in quantity, I think. Some of them are created for by some people who want to make money from this area. And I think there's an inflation in this standards globally. My question is that, do you agree with this issue? I know some panelists have talked about this, something like this. Mr. Correa said that it is important to be careful about not forming unnecessary standards? And my second question is that are authorities doing something to simplify these standards? Thank you.
No. Very good questions and very interesting questions to the panel. Let's take 2 or 3, or maybe if there are more questions related. I see a question from behind from Tibet.
Yes, perfect. Representing Kiel in Switzerland. So my question is complementing your question. So I also see the confusion of the consumers, not only in Turkey, but I think all over the world, that they're completely confused of the manifold kind of sustainability labels they find in the supermarket shelf. And to be honest, no consumer, even the experts, we also tested it by own studies, are really able to understand the differences about the different standards. So my question also goes a bit in your direction. Is there an initiative to unify the different private sustainability standards to bring them on a more understandable level for the consumer? My first question, and the second question is coming to the consumer trust. Do you trust, what percentage do you trust the labels, if the certificates on the labels really give an expression about the implementation of the standards which has been informed?
Thank you for that very good question. Let's take another one. I see here.
Thank you. So, Sergio from the Fair Trade Movement. First of all, really congratulations to everybody, because the report is great and very informative. I'll make sure that I share it widely. One question that...
you can still hear you. So
okay. So that's a question, and also a reaction to the question by the gentleman from FIBL, is that voluntary sustainability schemes do not operate in isolation. Actually, there are in-house sustainability schemes by a lot of companies. There are also unsubstantiated claims, meaning that there are sustainability claims that are not at all backed up by any voluntary sustainability standard. So I think that if we need to look at the issue of consumer perception, you need to look at this wider framework, because focusing on VSS is actually too limitative in a way. So therefore, the answer and the encouragement to the team is to look maybe at the relationship between VSS and other initiatives like in-house sustainability schemes and substantiated claims that are part of the neighbors or the environment into which VSS also operate.
Extremely valuable question. We'll take only one round of questions, so if there's any other question, we can take it, and then I'll see a speaker from Ande community.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Matteo from the community. I would like to know, regarding the launching of platforms in India and Brazil, I would like to know your experience about how the platform has improved the conditions of your exporters regarding the VSS.
Thank you for that question. My job is quite easy because I have 3 PhDs and an expert, so I'll just transfer the questions to these valuable persons. I think I would like to give the floor to Manish and Rogerio and Matteo to answer. We have the issues about the trust, we have the issues about multiplicity, we have the issues of unnecessary maybe, and what can be done on that, and we have also the issue that Sergey mentioned about many other ways in-house of standards development, and also the export opportunities with regards to VSS. So if you don't mind the UN agencies, I'll just provide the floor to our experts here, and I think I will start with Manish, please.
Okay, so first if I have to answer the question about trust, so usually we all understand that a logo mark will only be given after a certification process has been completed. So if there are issues in terms of the compliance on ground by the producer or any other one who is putting up the logo, it is an issue which can be tackled by the consumer by reporting it either to the certification body, to the accreditation body, and of course to the scheme owner. So within a system, these are all inbuilt mechanisms to see that things are not getting unsubstantiated or misreporting. Because ultimately, if a scheme is, if the logo of a scheme is being misused, then maybe in some time the scheme would itself die, because the consumer would have no trust and the logo would have no meaning. So this is what I understand by the rigor of the scheme, because making a scheme is the easiest part of the thing. The compliance and on-ground validation is the toughest. So this is our experience, and talking about the platform and its contribution towards exports. As far as India is concerned, we are seeing sustainability on a very different level. As far as we are concerned, we are trying to see whether the standards are in fact sustainable or not, because sustainability, as also we have heard, is a very loose word now, and everybody who is making a standard tells it is a VSS. So somewhere maybe a group of experts within us would, in India as a multi-stakeholder, would have a checklist to understand whether we can take off a standard as a sustainable standard and a voluntary sustainable standards together. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish, for your comments. Rogerio.
Trying to answer all the questions, I think it's important to understand the consumers' misunderstandings regarding there is a full proliferation of schemes. So it's completely understandable that. So an advice is don't give a blank check to VSS. All of them have to be fully assessed, and it's the message. I think the message behind them, connecting them with SDGs must be checked every time. Governments, regarding this, governments and national platform and stakeholders can work to constrain the proliferation of the scheme, keeping the essence of the VSS. Regarding the experience of how the platform improved the issue of exportations, I think is putting this VSS subject in the agenda of the discussions, promoting the talkings and the reflection of VSS and how they indeed connected to SDGs. I think it's the most important issue.
Thank you, Rogerio. Matteo, please.
Thanks. Yeah, very interesting points. I think one key word to answer this question is transparency, because we actually, and this relates to what the governments can do and what international organizations can do. Transparency is a necessary condition for consumers to know what they're buying, and for producers to orient themselves in a very fragmented market. In certain cases, producers are facing the same amount. I mean, the confusion that we face as consumers is a reflection of the confusion that might be faced by producers in the fields. And I really think that what governments and international organizations can do in terms of entering in the governance of VSS is to impose a certain threshold of transparency in the operations of the systems. This is what ICO does, for example. I mean, ICO, if you want to become a member of ICO as a VSS system, you need to satisfy a certain minimum threshold of transparency of your operations, how you set the standard, how you deal with certification, etc., etc. I think this is really a key dimension where public governance can help and participate in the governance of VSS. And the positive effects of this public participation would be reflected in the way consumers understand and perceive VSS, and in the way VSS are actually interpreted by producers as necessary tools or not necessary ones. But these things need to be transparent. You need to understand what they are and what they represent and how they work.
Thank you, Matteo. There's been a lot of interesting discussions and a lot of issues. To conclude this session, and I thank you all for staying so late, we as UN agencies would like to have provide public recognition to both India and Brazil for their national platforms on VSS. and we would like to provide them a certificate to commemorate the issue of launching a national private platform. In the case of India, it's the National Private Sustainability Standards, and also in the case of Brazil. And this is just to tell them that we value their working together with them, and thank you. So, Manish.
And to Rogerio and to NTMs.
Thank you. My boss will like it.
I conclude this session, and the meeting will start at 3 with our next panel. Thank you.